Marta found Tom collapsed by the frozen well, his fingers white and the empty grain sack dragged beside him. Fear tightened her hands before she knelt. She checked his pulse and felt the small, vicious flutter that meant frostbite had begun. Her breath steamed over the knitted coif of his cap. Around them the lane lay white and silent except for a distant bell, but Marta heard the scrape of boots coming fast across packed snow. She shouldered Tom's sack and scanned the lane for light. In the next step, Marta's fear turned into fast, practical decisions. She lifted Tom under the ribs, felt his ribs lock against her hip, and forced a warm answer from him. Tom. Tom. Wake. His eyes opened thinly. Marta. He whispered and then was gone again, voice lost to cold. Within 5 minutes Marta had his cloak over his shoulders and was dragging him toward the longhouse. That was the problem she brought back. Fuel and food were running thin, and the hamlet could not afford one more frozen body. The central conflict lay there plainly. People were cold, coals were scarce, and choices would break trust. Marta's fear shaped her steps. She had led in winter before by making lists of who ate and who warmed. Tonight she felt the old rule underneath her hands, the rule that decisions must be quick, and that each choice carried other people's throats in it. She tapped her fingertip on the rim of Tom's sack as she walked, a small motion she did when calculating, and held the warm, sharp awareness of what would be lost if they failed. They reached the longhouse with Tom half conscious in Marta's arms. Smoke rose from the central chimney in a ragged column. Voices spilled from the door, thin and angry. Someone said, "Pete's gone." "Who took it?" Another voice answered, "Not my work." Marta pushed in, boots tracking salt and grit across the threshold. Inside, the longhouse smelled of damp wool and boiled grain. Several faces turned. Old Miller's brow was low. Enya, the midwife, had flour on her hands. Thomas, Marta's son, stood near the hearth and looked at his mother with a question already there. The argument dissolved around Marta's entrance, the room becoming a ring of accusations and ragged, fearful sentences. "We must share what's left," Marta, placing Tom by the hearth. She set the sack down and loosened his linen. "Tom needs heat now." Her voice was low and steady. The old miller leaned forward. "Marta, we counted coals this noon. Little left. Thomas, someone's been keeping a stash." Elias was seen near the woodpile at dusk. Enya looked at Marta and added, "Children cough already." "We can't wait." Those lines, Elias's name, the children's cough, pinned the room's direction. A decision point sat heavy in the circle. Arguments came fast then. Voices rose in short lines. "He took what was ours." Old Miller snapped, "Show me the man and I'll show you his house." Elias' name was called again from the doorway, sharp and sudden. "We cannot open every door, Enya, not while the child sleeps," cracking like a bell for each breath. 3 quick exchanges followed, each under 10 words. Marta watched Thomas press his thumb to his lip. He was younger, quick with anger. "Thomas, Marta, listen. We decide for shelter first. Then we ask why." Her hand smoothed the apron at her waist in that small ritual pause. The cloth smelled faintly of smoke. They moved to the hearth to lay a plan. Marta counted coals by sight and memory. She offered the soft certainty that people could be organized. Each house could have 2 hours of hearth use in one turn, mother's first, then the old. She set a rhythm. But old Miller's jaw tightened. "And who gives up to whom?" he asked. "I ground flour for the whole lane." The room tightened. The argument spread like a bruise. Marta tried barter. She drew the small copper locket from beneath her shawl and set it open on the table. The locket carried a faded portrait of her mother. She put it forward slowly. "I'll trade this for a bundle of peat," she said. "A single bundle for the children tonight." Enya's hand went to Marta's arm. "Marta, you don't have to." Thomas interrupted. "Marta, don't." The old miller's face folded. "This is not for sale." The locket won't keep a child warm. The refusal hit like a physical thud. Marta's hand stayed steady. Her breath tightened. Across the hearth, a young man, Elias, stood staring at the coals with his fingers white from cold. He avoided Marta's eye. "I only took a little." he muttered, "for my sister's babe. She will not bear this cold." The room surged. "Elias, our old miller." The woodpile shows moved bundles. "You knew where to move them." His tone was accusation made blunt. Elias's jaw set and his shoulders rose. Confrontation came next. Thomas stepped toward Elias and said, "Bring it out now." Elias folded his arms. "You want to break my door." The voice exchange tightened. Thomas, Elias, old miller, Marta. They traded 3 rapid, clipped lines. Marta put her palm on Thomas' arm. She spoke once, a quiet, firm instruction: "Hold. We'll go together. No breaking. No blood tonight." Her voice carried the steadiness of someone used to holding back children's hands from anger. They organized a small party to check the communal woodpile. Marta wrapped Tom's cloak around her shoulders and gave Tom a cup of warmed broth. He drank slowly, each swallow careful. Marta watched him. The cup left a red ring on his lips where the cold had made them raw. She felt anger and then the movement of strategy. She led Thomas, Enya, and 2 other villagers across drifted lanes while the wind began to pick up. At the woodpile they found footprints and piles moved aside. Snow masked the original order. Marta crouched and found the indents that showed a young wait, prints that suggested someone had returned to this spot twice. "See here," she said, tapping the prints. "The track goes back to the hedgerow and then to the lane toward Elias's cottage." Thomas swore under his breath. "Elias hid a stash," he said. They moved in pairs and then closed in on Elias's small lean to at the hamlet's edge. The house sat low with smoke staining the roof. Enya knocked. A child's voice answered and then silence. Marta heard the scrape of wood behind the door. For a second she thought it might be the sound of a shovel. Elias opened the door halfway and then pulled it back with a look that tried to make his face blank. Marta's breath shortened. "Elias, we found the woodpile disturbed." She kept her voice even. His eyes flicked to the interior, to a stack of rough bundles under a cloth. "It's not much." "Elias, my sister, show us," Thomas demanded. Elias hesitated and then pushed the cloth back. Under it lay peat wrapped tightly in oilskin. The room smelled of wet earth and a faint iron tang. The villagers crowded the threshold. Old Miller counted with his eyes and spat a line that cut, enough to warm 2 houses for a day. Not for an entire hamlet. Thomas advanced and reached for a bundle. Elias stepped between him and the peat. "You will not take them from me here, Elias." His voice held that raw edge of a man who feared for a close family member. "My sister will freeze. My sister's baby is due in a week." Marta heard the plea, and the shift in feeling. Anger bent toward something else. She saw Enya's face change. Enya's hands went to Elias's sleeve. "Elias, Enya, we are all losing our children. If she cannot warm the babe, we will lose more than a day's patience." They argued with short lines. Marta watched each turn. Her finger tapped the rim of a pot. The argument broke into 3 quick exchanges, then a slow, quieter bargaining. Marta proposed a split. "We take 1 bundle tonight and leave 1 for your sister. We rotate. You bring her here next watch. We will hold watch with the babe." Elias's shoulders bowed, and he let out a small sound. Old Miller grunted but did not refuse. Thomas' mouth tightened. "She's not my sister, Elias." The room's suspicion sharpened. They left the cottage with 2 bundles. Snow had turned to a low, drumming fall. A new problem waited on the lane. Smoke climbing from a cottage roof near the green. Marta broke into a run. The smell burned into her throat. An indoor fire, too close. Someone had stacked damp wood against the hearth and left it to smolder. They reached a small house with smoke coming from under the eaves. The door hung open. A pot sat on the hearth with charred edges. No child's cry came at first. Marta's chest beat hard. Enya called, "Where is the child?" Thomas shouted, "Someone fetch water." Marta rushed inside and saw soot on the rafters. She felt the heat against her face, but also the hollow of panic. The cradle stood empty and the bedclothes were shoved aside. The villagers spread out and called names. A neighbor, breathless, screamed, "She's gone. Little Greta's gone," from the bed. Thomas grabbed Marta's sleeve. "They took a child," he said. Marta ran back into the snow, the cold slapping her cheeks, and counted the doors as she passed. Each house answered with fear. This discovery changed everything. An absent child turned scarcity into immediacy. They no longer argued about fair shares. They hunted for a missing life. Marta's fear shifted into a sharper, outraged protectiveness. She moved faster. She ordered searches, checked hedgerows, and asked each neighbor what they'd seen. The night multiplied hints. A footprint by the lane that did not match the usual boots, a muffled sack dragged near the tree line, and then a torn piece of cloth caught on a bramble. Marta picked the scrap free with trembling fingers. The cloth was coarse and stitched with a small emblem she recognized from a market banner she'd once seen. 3 short lines of red thread forming a mark used by a hamlet 2 valleys away. She folded the scrap into her palm and felt the edges cut her skin. A new suspicion lodged in her head like a stone. This might not be about one man's hoarding. It could be part of a wider pattern. Back at the longhouse, the mood was harsher. People spoke in shorter lines. They argued 3 at a time, quick and sharp. "We search the valley now," Thomas ordered. "No, we wait until dawn." Old Miller replied, "The child is gone this hour." "Enya." Marta cut in. "We split. Half search now, half watch the hearth. I will take the first search party." Several heads turned to her. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Marta, you should not go." "I will find Greta or I will bring news." Marta. Her pace had that old, methodical steadiness that carried people forward. She gave instructions in short sentences, and then gathered a small party. Thomas, Enya, Elias, and 2 others. They moved in a wedge through falling snow. Marta kept the scrap folded in her hand like a tally. Each step presented a new detail. A child's mitten caught on a fence post, a smear of soot along a fence, the shape of a small boot print that headed toward the north track. Every sight moved the plot forward. At one point the group found shallow tracks that led away from the lane and toward the wood, where the hamlet's boundary thinned. The tracks widened there and then vanished. Marta's mind sharpened. She questioned Elias with quick, small questions. "Elias, who did you meet at market? Did anyone offer to buy Pete?" He answered in short lines, "A trader. He came at dusk and asked which houses. He offered coins for large bundles." The new information added a twist. Perhaps someone had been buying fuel from villagers at low price and carrying it away. Marta's suspicion of the hoarder shifted to suspicion of outside buyers. Her anger cooled into a planning anger, cold, focused. They returned to the hamlet and found the longhouse fuller and quieter. Tom slept at Marta's knee with a rough blanket. Noise and anger had given way to a brittle coordination. Marta set a rotation for patrols and for the hearth. She put her hand to Tom's forehead and felt a slight heat. Her voice grew softer when she spoke to the children. Enya and Thomas argued in low voices about who would stand watch. They traded 3 lines that ended in a plan. At the longhouse hearth, the climax came before dawn. The hoarder, an older villager known for guarding his small storeroom, refused to share a single coal. Voices rose, the argument moved fast. Thomas accused, the hoarder refused. Elias started to argue back. Marta stepped forward and reached into the small basket at her feet. She took the last coal from her own home, the one she'd kept for herself that night, and placed it in the longhouse embers. Silence hit like a struck plank. The hoarder stood rigid. Thomas stepped toward him, fist half raised. Old Miller moved as if to seize the man. Marta's hand rested on Thomas' arm and then she spoke one line. "We keep children alive or we keep our grudges." Her sentence had the measure of command and a soft iron in it. The hoarder tried to snatch the coal back, but the other villagers closed ranks. Elias's face changed. He looked suddenly guilty and small. Thomas' anger faltered. Words came quick then, 3 to 6 rapid lines traded between Thomas, the hoarder, Elias, Marta, and old Miller. "Thomas, you refused children heat." Hoarder, "It was mine, I earned it." Elias, "You would watch them die for pride." Marta, "No. We do what we must." The back and forth exposed motives and fear. The hoarder folded. He returned the coal. The room settled into a breath of exhaustion. After the conflict, the longhouse held its small, fragile peace. People clustered close to the hearth. Children slept with their faces flushed. Old Miller and Enya spoke low about rationing into palm lines and lists. Thomas sat with his head bowed. Elias stood with a hand against the wall, shoulders rigid. Marta let out a breath and felt the hot ache behind her ribs. She had given up her coal and calmed a near-violent outburst. When Marta returned home at dawn, the hamlet had quieted. Frost laced the window panes. Her own cottage felt colder than it had any night she remembered. The hearth there had gone out. Marta closed the door and set Tom to lie by the low bench. She found a cup and filled it with thin broth. Her movements were small and precise. She counted each action with the care of someone who measures the weight of every unspoken debt. Alone in the pale morning, Marta found the scrap of cloth pinned beneath a boot on her doorstep. She had not noticed it before. The emblem stitched into the cloth matched the mark she had found earlier. Now it lay flat and clean against her palm. The sight changed how she understood the night's events. She felt the rise of a new, heavier unease that was not merely about hunger. It implied coordination beyond one desperate man. Marta pressed the cloth to her face and smelled dust and smoke. She remembered the trader Elias had named. She folded the scrap into the small copper locket and clipped it shut. Her hands were steady as she did it. For a moment she sat and let the cold find the bone of her fingers. Then she rose, wrapped her worn shawl about her, and stepped out. At the threshold she paused and listened. A child coughed in the lane. 2 men moved past, speaking names. Marta could not yet tell what would come next. She carried the cloth inward and set the locket back beneath her shawl. The night had closed one argument and opened another. The hamlet had warmth around the longhouse hearth for a few hours, but Marta now held a fact that would shape the next decisions. The scrap was from another valley. Someone was buying or taking fuel away. The chapter ends with Marta lifting the latch to roust Thomas for the dawn meeting and slipping the scrap into her palm. She nothing allowed. Her choice was visible. She would take the scrap to the longhouse and show it, and the hamlet would have to choose whether to stay and defend their stores or to move to meet whatever force had begun to take what they had. The last sound before she closed the door behind her was the faint, urgent cough of a child outside, and Marta's footfall as she stepped back into the lane toward a meeting that would decide more than fuel. Marta shoved the cottage door with both shoulders, and a plank groaned free. Smoke and cold hit her face. The hearth lay low, only a thin red line between blackened stones, and a small child sat on the floor coughing, fingers white where the glove had slipped. Suspicion tightened Marta's hands when she saw the empty peat basket by the wall. She set the child's cheek against her wrist and listened to the faint high wheeze greater. Marta, voice low and quick, "Where is your firewood?" Greta's answer came as a single, raw breath. "I thought the cart would come." I thought. Marta's fear held her brief and steady. She had found Tom collapsed by the frozen well last week. His fingers went numb and the grain sack lay empty beside him. That night had taught Marta what a single missing cart could mean. She moved from the child to the hearth and crouched, searching the ashes with a gloved hand. Her fingers found a stubborn ember beneath a crust of cinder. She blew once, then again, watching the glow wake. Marta's hands were steady, but her jaw worked. The problem was clear. The village's fuel had failed to arrive, and someone had fewer pieces than others. Greta wrapped both arms around herself and shivered. "I saved the last pieces," she said. "I thought I could keep bit by bit. I could not feed them both. I could not." Marta cut her off with a look that said she understood rationing and hunger, but that other things now mattered. She lifted the child's chin and spoke to the child, not Greta. "Hold this against your chest. Breathe slow." The child obeyed. Greta tightened her fingers on the hem of her apron and would not meet Marta's eyes. Marta stood and stepped back into the lane. The air stung. She kept the door half open and called for Tom and Elias by name, because names gathered people faster than words. They arrived in 2 breaths. Tom with his patched coat and Elias with a lantern. Tom held his shoulders high and rubbed his hands together without looking at Marta. Marta remembered the frozen well and the way Tom had gone pale last week. That memory turned into the small engine that moved her now. She did not ask Tom to explain his absence. She handed him the emptied peat basket and said, "Go to the bakehouse. Tell Brother Ansel to come." The bakehouse smelled of stale flour and old heat. Marta found a bare bench and set the empty basket between her knees. People were already there. Elias, Tom, Brother Ansel, Greta with her child, and 3 others whose faces were set in thin lines. Voices rose then sank. Marta's suspicion had spread into the room like a physical ache. She could see it tighten the mouths of neighbours. If the cart is held up, we must decide who will host fires. Elias, we cannot all keep small embers in every house and expect them to last. Brother Ansel folded his hands as if to pray and did not meet Marta's eyes. The chapel will open its hearth when needed, he said. We keep a reserve for services and the poor. His voice had a soft steadiness that had comforted villagers before. Marta watched his hands where the knuckles white under dirt and thought of the chapel storeroom she had not entered. Suspicion nudged her again. Do we know the cart is delayed, or has someone kept stores back? Marta, her voice had no flourish. It did not need one. Elias exchanged a quick look with Tom. Roads are worse. The bailiff has stopped carts nearer the ford. Elias, the peat men from Eldon turned back 2 days past. It was thick snow and a locked gate at the north lane, Tom added. A messenger came. He swore the cart stalled at the fen. He could not reach us by dawn. Marta heard the words and felt the room thin. The kernel of the problem remained. Fuel would not reach them. Every face in the bakehouse answered in a different shape of worry. Marta pushed her fingers into the empty basket and found a line scratched into the wood where a name had been carved. She recognized the shallow tally and remembered seeing similar marks on the grain sacks last month. A thought clicked under her ribs. If the cart will not come, then waiting is a risk. We must bring what we can from the fen ourselves, she said. Some heads lifted. Marta, the fen is ice and wind. You saw the messenger. Brother Ansel's hand went to his chest in a slow defensive gesture. Elias's mouth tightened. We lose men to the wind. We lose men to thin ice. Is that your plan? He asked. Tom's reply came clipped. We lose more if we do nothing. My hands are useful for hauling. Marta can lead. There was a short, sharp exchange then. Marta named the route she would take. Elias argued the risk, and Tom only, I go with you. The argument was 5 lines long. It ended with Marta taking a small sack from her sleeve and tying it to Tom's belt. They left the bakehouse under a sky that had already lost shape to the coming storm. The lane carried a thin crust of snow and the lamplight blurred at the edges. Marta led eyes on tracks. Elias walked with a borrowed pole. Tom kept a quiet step behind and his breath came in steady puffs. On the march to the fen, Marta's emotion shifted. Suspicion became a hard edge and then melted into a steadier fear for the villagers. She watched Tom's hands for signs of weakness. His fingers closed on the pole too soon, and she adjusted her stride to keep him between her and the wind. Halfway to the fen, a messenger burst into view, boots ringing against packed snow. He handed Marta a folded note and sank onto a bale as if the motion exhausted him. Marta unfolded the paper with numb fingers and read a close scrawl. The bailiff had barred carts at the ford and claimed tolls unpaid. The peat cart had been left by the cart driver when he fell ill. The note added one line that stung. A local hand had taken a small bundle from the cart. Marta's stomach tightened. The news moved the group's fear into immediate anger. Taken. Who took it? Elias demanded. The messenger shook his head. I could not see. The driver named no man. Someone from the chapel came at dawn and led a lit lantern away with a single bale. He could only say the man wore a brown hood. Brother Ansel's jaw worked. He nothing. Marta thought of the chapel hearth and the quiet way Brother Ansel had said reserves existed. The group's emotion shifted again, from fear and anger into a new, bitter doubt. Someone had already reached the peat. Someone had chosen to keep warmth hidden. Marta set her hands on her knees and looked at Tom. "Did you go near the chapel last night?" she asked. Tom hesitated and then said, "I walked the lane to check the longhouse latrine. I passed the chapel at dusk." Brother Ansel was lighted at the window. His words were small and exact. Marta's eyes found Elias. Elias's mouth had tightened into a line of accusation. Brother Ansel still pressed his lips together. The messenger shifted his weight and watched the three of them like one balanced question. They walked the last stretch to the stranded cart, with wind cutting their faces and salt of peat in the air. The cart sat on a shallow rise, half covered in drift. The peat lay stacked but not untouched. Someone had removed 2 short blocks and left clean scrape marks along the side. Marta's heart pushed into a new rhythm. She tightened her scarf and walked the circle of the cart, finding a carved tali on a plank, 3 notches and a small mark she had seen before. It pointed back to the chapel. Her suspicion hardened into certain unease. Someone took from here. Someone from the village, Marta. Elias crouched and probed the frozen mud with a stick. These tracks are slippered boots, not peat men's boots. They head toward the chapel and then toward the longhouse. They are recent. Tom traced a line with his finger and stood up fast. "Why would they take peat and leave this visible?" he asked. Marta looked down at the scrape marks again. The answer came as a concrete possibility. Someone had taken only enough to hide the rest. Someone had a secret store. The group felt the direction of the problem sharpen. They set out toward the chapel under a sky that had lost the sun. The chapel door gave with a pry and a breath that smelled of incense and cold air. Marta pushed the vestibule door and found it locked from inside. She banged once, then again, and Brother Ansel answered with a voice like a thin bell. "Who is there?" he asked. Marta answered with the names of those at the cart. Brother Ansel open. "There is peat gone from the cart." We followed the track inside. The chapel held the hush of prayers and wax. Marta stepped around a pew and found a side door barred with rope. The rope had been cut at one end and tied with a simple knot. Marta's hands went to the latch. The room smelled of wood and cloth. She opened the storeroom now. Her voice had the edge of someone who had seen a man lie by a well and knew how small mistakes multiplied. Brother Ansel's shoulders rose. He spoke with a measured calm that did not match the tremor in his fingers. "We keep a small supply for rights and necessary needs," he said. It was thought safer inside the chapel. "You may search." Elias and Tom moved quick, and Marta waited beside the locked door. Tom found the key under a pew in a place a careful person would hide one. The key turned with a sound the room swallowed. They pulled the storeroom door open, and the smell of peat and dry wood hit them like a wall. A stack of peat lay on the floor, wrapped in oilcloth, and wood piled heaped like a small raft. The villagers' faces folded between relief and rage. Marta's hands tightened on the doorframe. She stepped inside and counted the bundles with a small, practical motion. There were more bundles than a chapel might need for services that month. Someone had moved reserves to the chapel and not told the village. Brother Ansel stood with his hands limp at his sides and did not meet anyone's eyes. Tom broke the silence. "Brother Ansel, why was this kept from us?" His voice was low and quick. Brother Ansel straightened. I kept it for the sick and the altar. I thought it best to guard it from thieves." "I meant no harm." Elias turned on him. "You thought to hide our warmth. You kept stores while people in their beds had none." Elias' words were a cut. Brother Ansel made a small, inward movement, and his voice lowered to something like a confession. "We had letters of donations for repairs. I feared the repairs would be lost. I feared theft. I thought to save them." The exchange moved from question to accusation and back. The room filled with short lines of angry talk. Marta stepped between them and put one palm on the stacked oilcloth. We cannot argue about judgment now. Marta, our people are freezing. We must decide who needs what first." Her voice slowed the room. She took a scrap of paper and, with Tom and Elias, began to read names aloud. They read the old ledger that Brother Ansel kept for parishers who had given grain or gifts. The ledger listed a dozen names with notes about debts and offerings. Marta named the most vulnerable first, Greta and her child, old Hilda with the bad knee, the smith's widow with 3 small ones. As they read, the mood shifted again from accusation to a practical, brutal sorting of who would be warmed. Greta stepped back, head bowed, fingers worrying at a seam. "I should not have taken so much for the child," she said, small and honest. Her voice broke. Tom moved to her and put a gloved hand on her shoulder. "Greta, you did what you could." Tom. The exchange pulled the room to softer lines, but the H of betrayal remained. Brother Ansel's face folded in a way that said he had not expected to be called a thief, only a guardian. Elias kept a sharp gaze on him, not walking away from the question. Marta watched each person choose through gesture and short lines of speech who would carry what home. At dawn the village gathered on the green with peat, and wood redistributed in rough bundles. People read their names aloud and took their allotments. Some cried softly, others spoke no words at all. Marta stood near the longhouse and watched a child whose cheeks had been raw now sleep with his head against a lap by the communal hearth. The village had made a choice. The supplies in the chapel would be shared. Brother Ansel passed a bundle to Greta with hands that trembled. "Take it," he said, "use it for them." Greta nodded and clutched the bundle like a small relief. But the chapter did not close with comfort. 2 men protested loudly and demanded an accounting. "Why should we give to those who professed gifts?" one shouted. Arguments rose in short, sharp lines. Marta moved between the speakers and raised her voice once. "We will read needs, not donations," she said. "We will give to the most vulnerable first. If anyone has complaints, name them, and we will list them." The interlocution produced 3 quick rounds of back and forth, each line clipped and practical. Elias read the list of households who would host communal fires that night. Tom volunteered his yard for a small relay stove. Brother Ansel accepted a place near the bakehouse to watch the stores used for the community. There was a small twist before the end. When Marta opened the ledger to cross out those who had received help, she found a folded scrap tucked between the pages. Inside was a short note in a different hand, a tally of peat removed twice last month, and the name of a woman who had given it away in secret. The woman's name surprised Marta. It was one of the quiet neighbours who had never spoken in gatherings. The discovery changed the shape of blame. It was not all hoarding from the top. Some took for other reasons, hidden and urgent. The new fact moved the villagers' anger into a more complicated place. They could not curse only one act. By mid-morning, with bundles carried, fires stoked, and an uneasy calm settling, Marta sat near the longhouse hearth and smoothed Greta's shawl tighter around the child's shoulders. She watched the ember bright and steady, watched the child breathe even. Her hands moved with the slow method of someone who had soothed Tom at the well, and now soothed a different fragility. Elias stood by the doorway, watching the road for more messengers. Tom folded his arms and kept his chin tucked against the scarf. Marta's final choice that morning was simple and concrete. She took a small key from her pocket, an old key to the village chest that she kept for barter records, and placed it in Brother Ansel's open hand. "You will stay where you are and help me watch the stores you have opened," she said. Her tone was firm and practical. She did not call him a thief. She gave him an action to do: inventory, account, and speak the names of those in need aloud when asked. Brother Ansel swallowed and nodded. Elias moved to set a rotation for watchers. Tom and the quiet woman with the hidden note offered to lead a small round each night to check that supplies were not moved without notice. Dawn became small and pale. The child near Marta blinked and inched a finger free from a mitten to test warmth. Greta smiled once, raw and small, then bent to tie her boot. The villagers gathered their tools and returned to work with bundles balanced on shoulders or tucked under cloaks. The immediate danger had shifted into a new, ongoing problem: how to keep trust when fear made secrets tempting. Marta felt that shift in her hands when she folded her shawl. Her suspicion had led them to the chapel and forced a hard decision. Now her movement turned to careful work and watchfulness. Outside, a wind rose from the fen, and the path toward the stranded cart lay white and waiting. Marta watched Tom and Elias shoulder a bundle for the watch. She called their names and they turned. "Take 2 men on the last round tonight," she said. "Bring robes and oilcloth. Check the chapel door at dusk." Tom nodded. Elias made a small sound and then said, "Marta, what if they take again?" Marta looked at the edge of the green and then at the child's sleeping face. Her voice was low and without flourish. "We will stop them by being a village that counts each life out loud," she said. It was not a pronouncement. It was a plan of small, certain steps. As the village dispersed, Marta tucked the scrap of paper she had found into her apron and kept the ledger open on the bench. She realized the winter would demand more small betrayals and brave, quiet repairs. The decision to open the chapel stores had solved the immediate need and forced a new, public watch. The villagers now had to balance shame, need, and the practical hours of tending a single ember. Marta rose, smoothed her coal, smudged apron, and walked to the longhouse where the communal hearth needed tending that evening. She set down the ledger and called the names of those who would stand the first watch. The last sound in the chapter was not a reflection, but a concrete action. Brother Ansel closing the ledger with his rough hand and promising, aloud, to record every bundle given and taken that day. The granary lid groaned under Marta's hands when she levered it open and snow blew across the threshold like a thrown cloth. Suspicion tightened Marta's fingers before she even looked inside. A torn parchment seal lay folded against the stone, and the grain sacks beneath showed ragged holes where weight had gone. She reached for the nearest sack and felt only thin, brittle straw where there should have been bulk. By the 3rd sack she was certain. The winter stores were gone. That certainty turned her breath into a small, visible sound against the cold wall. Marta scanned the yard for footprints. The snow held a set of fresh, muddied tracks leading away from the granary towards the mill, and the edges of the prints were soft, as if someone had hurried. She called for Lars without stepping back from the doorway. "Lars!" She shouted, and her voice cut through the open space like flint. She did not ask a question. The tracks answered in silence for the moment. She was careful with her movements. Marta had learned to move quietly since Tom's fall at the well, and since the longhouse embers faded. Those memories sat close enough to touch. Her hands smelled of coal and damp wool as she crouched, thumb tracing the torn seal. She thought of the thin red line of a hearth from the last time she pushed open a cottage door, and she felt the old, steady habit of measuring loss before speaking. Lars came from the mill yard, cursing under his breath at the cold. He wore his usual leather cap and carried a small, damp sack at his shoulder. Marta stepped into the sun that made the courtyard glare. "Lars," she said, and the name was even. She kept her voice low. "Why are you carrying that here?" Lars stopped and set the sack on his heel. He did not meet Marta's eyes at first. "Brother Alden me to move it, Marta." He for safekeeping, his hands flexed, fingers going white at the knuckle where the sack pressed. The explanation came in quick, clumsy pieces. Marta's suspicion shifted when she saw the smell of salt on his boots. He had been along the lane towards the chapel. She pushed forward. "Show me the seal you put on the chest when you moved it," she said. He dragged a hand across his face. "There was no chest at the mill. I brought sacks to the chapel. Brother Alden, it was safer with him. He gave no seal." Marta's jaw tightened. The emotion in her chest moved from suspicion into a sharp, cold anger that made her speak faster. She crossed to the mill, fingers tapping the wheel as if to steady herself. Brother Alden does not keep what he has no use for. He would have placed a mark. He would have told the council, who else saw you? Lars swallowed, only me. I moved them at dawn. I did not take them for myself. The wind pushed against them while Marta read the tracks again, then followed them toward the chapel. By the time she reached the nave, a few neighbours had gathered, Enya among them, cheeks red and eyes hard with worry. The chapel door hung slightly open, light from a single candle guttering within. Brother Alden stood by a row of low benches when Marta entered, his hands folded around a cloth as if he were holding the world together. He looked older than Marta remembered, and his robe was dusted at the hem with peat ash. Marta, he said, voice cautious, what brings you here in the sun? Marta did not answer with pleasantry. The granary has been opened. The seal is torn. Sacks are gone. Lars says you moved some here for safekeeping. Brother Alden's face closed. We moved a portion from the mill when the rafters showed rot. I moved it to prevent spoilage. Enya stepped forward, voice low and sharp. You moved the village grain without telling the council. You moved it when the council would have chosen who must eat less. Brother Alden's hand tightened on the cloth. There is rot. I did what I thought would save us all. Enya's anger flashed into a direct accusation. You took what might have fed Edda and her child. You hid it where only you could say who eats. A hush followed. Outside, a wind pushed a loose slate on the chapel roof, and it clicked once. The argument lodged in the room like a stone. Marta listened to the words and watched the small gestures. Brother Alden's fingers tapping the linen, Enya's chin jutting, Lars' eyes flitting to the doorway. Her mind shifted again. Suspicion gave way to impatience, then to a spare, steady determination to find the truth, rather than let the village tear itself apart over suspicion. Show where you put the sacks, she said simply. Brother Alden led them to a storeroom in the back, a low space behind a patched curtain. Candlelight made dust lines visible as they stepped in. The chests along the wall were closed and sealed in places, but the floor between them held scraps of coarse linen and a child, smitten folded into a corner. The mitten had a thumb chewed at the seam and a small brown stain on the cuff. Enya's hand went white on the curtain. That mitten, she said, I know it. Edda's daughter lost one like that last week. Marta felt the emotion in her chest change again. Anger loosened into a soft, aching pity that pressed at her throat. She moved faster than she had expected, down the lane and across the frozen yard to Edda's cottage. The door was shut, but light pooled under the threshold like a promise. Someone was awake. Edda opened the door before Marta rapped twice. Her hair lay in a loose knot beneath a worn coif. She looked smaller than Marta remembered, as if the walls had eaten weight from her. She had a fever in her face, the cheeks flushed and the eyes glassy. A small boy clutched at the hem of her tunic, cuffing into his sleeve. Edda, Marta, and her voice went low. Tell me exactly what you took. Edda blinked and then her hands went to the cupboard. She opened it, and there were more empty spaces than jars. Only what I thought I could carry, she said. The children went hungry 2 nights. Enya cut in, voice tight. Why would you take from the granary? Why not ask the council? Edda's fingers fumbled at a rag. I did not think I could wait. The child burned with fever last night. There was no grain on our shelves. I thought the chapel was safer. I thought Brother Alden would help. Her breathing came in quick, small pulls. Lars, who had followed Marta, stepped close. I brought them. Me too. Brother Alden, me to keep them safe. His voice had that uneven, guilty cadence of a man who had not slept. He met Edda's eyes. I did as I was told. Edda's mouth opened as if to say thank you, then closed. She pushed a plate toward Marta with a hand that trembled. Her fingers left a salt ring on the wood. Marta felt her own hands move almost without permission. She took the plate, weighed the smallness of what it would provide. That night, Marta did not return to the chapel alone. She gathered Enya and Lars, and they walked back through the lane under a sky that swallowed sound. Their steps were measured. They did not want any watchful eye to mistake them for thieves. When they reached the chapel, Brother Alden stood at the doorway like a sentinel, candlelight hallowing his face, Brother Alden, martyr, and the name held the edge of a demand now. Open the chests. Show us the stores you kept. Brother Alden's jaw went hard. No. I cannot release what I set aside. The church protects the needy. I protect what the church holds for those in greater need than the village council can adjudge. Enya replied quickly, greater need. Brother Alden, Edda's child, is fevered in a cold house. Lars has carried sacks here under your instruction. This is not a debate about law. People are starving. There was a brief, sharp exchange of words then, 3 to 6 quick lines that pushed the argument into a physical rhythm. You accuse me of theft. Brother Alden snapped. You call it protection, and we call it secrecy. Enya shot back. We saw the granary seal torn, martyr. You speak as though I am the only shepherd here, Brother Alden, voice climbing. What would you have me do? Hand it over to the village and have it wasted. Hand it over for those who will not starve tonight. Lars, and his voice lacked the certainty he wished for. The exchange halted as if the room could not hold more heat. Brother Alden's shoulders slumped in a small, private way. He counted the cost of everything he had done. Marta watched his fingers find the seam of a chest and slide the seal free. She had watched enough hearths die and enough hands shake to know the measure of a man's choices. When the chest opened, it did not reveal the bulk of grain the granary once held. There were, however, several small sacks, tightly packed and wrapped in oilcloth. Marta's eyes flicked to the labels, to any mark that might reveal who had more claim. Inside one sack, hidden under a scrap of linen, she found several handfuls of grain and a small, folded note with Brother Alden's scrawl, reserved for fever and the weak. Keep until necessary. The handwriting was certain, unashamed, and precise. The discovery shifted Marta's feeling again. Pity hardened into a careful clarity that tempered anger and suspicion. She nothing for a long moment. Enya's lips moved in a thin line. Lars stared at the floor. Brother Alden's face had opened to something like exhaustion. Why not tell the council? Marta finally. Brother Alden's reply came quiet, each word measured. I feared the council would divide it and a child would still wake to an empty bowl. I feared numbers over need. I feared their judgment might leave the sick to die. Edda's small son coughed from the doorway where he watched, and the sound folded the room into a new urgency. It was a concrete reminder of the stakes. The tension in Marta's body loosened into action. She stepped forward, took a handful of grain, and pushed it into Edda's waiting hands. We will not leave him tonight. Marta, Enya, take 2 portions to the nearest house. Lars, bring a kettle. Brother Alden, help us grind what little is here. We will share it tonight and tomorrow, and we will make small lists of who truly needs help. Enya moved immediately, the hardness at her edges shifting into work. Lars blinked and then obeyed. Brother Alden's fingers shook as he set the sack on the table, and he muttered a prayer under his breath before his hands began to count. They worked through the deep night, the small group grinding, boiling and measuring by candlelight. Marta kept a ledger in her head. Who had little, who had none, who had a cough and a fever. Each movement carried a moral weight. Each portion given was a decision that might cause another to go short. The emotion in the room changed from accusation through grief into a pragmatic resolve. This change came not as a speech but as hands moving, spoons scraping, and quiet names said into the steam. At one point, when the kettle hissed and a child slept with a straw of breath, Lars stopped and said, You could have had more if you'd asked, Brother Alden. Why hide it? His voice was raw with fear and resentment. Brother Alden answered with a short sentence that seemed to close an argument and open another. I thought I could choose better than they could. I was wrong to hide it. That admission shifted the room again. Guilt softened into a brittle apology. Marta watched Brother Alden's hands fold like paper and felt the need to transform words into action. She collected the smallest sacks and instructed Enya to carry them to Edda's hearth while Lars fetched extra peat from the mill. The plan was quiet and effective. Share tonight, record the sorrow, plan a rota for the coals. Before dawn, they moved through the village one house at a time. Each door revealed a new small despair. Empty bowls, a child with a hurt lip, an old woman who had sold her only blanket for bread. They left measured portions, a cup of stew, and a little peat wrapped in cloth. Some neighbours whispered thanks. Others watched with faces set like winter fields. At the porch of one cottage, a woman named Mirren pushed back her shawl and said, "Marta, we have nothing to give in return but our labour. We will help mend coats and carry water." Marta accepted the offer with a nod. "That will be enough," she said. The exchange was practical, the kind that mended more than rags. As they returned toward Marta's own low hearth, she counted the remaining coals by touch, not by speech, and set a modest rota that would keep a single fire burning through 4 houses. Lars and Enya stood with her in the dim dawn, and Brother Alden lingered at the edge, his robes smudged with soot. There was a small twist in the last movements before daylight. When Lars unloaded the mill cart of peat, he set down a hidden bundle that contained a small, tattered ledger. An account book with several scribbled entries that showed deliveries to the chapel over the past month. The ledger revealed dates when sacks were moved and a marginal note that matched Brother Alden's folded hand. For Marta, the ledger was a concrete fact that altered how she understood the earlier openings. It showed planning rather than sudden secrecy. It showed that some sacks had been moved in fits of pragmatic fear over several weeks, not taken in a single theft. Marta held the ledger like a small, heavy truth. Her emotion moved from wary acceptance into a steady resolve to change process rather than punish. We will make a rota for peat and grain. We will write names and days. Brother Alden, you will bring records to the council so we can decide together. Brother Alden nodded. He placed his palm to his chest in a gesture of concession. "I will bring the ledger," he said. They arranged the distribution quietly at Marta's hearth. The decision was small and administrative, but it shifted the village's immediate danger. Edda's child would have porridge at dawn. The woman with the hurt lip would have a bandage and broth. Mirren would mend cloaks for fire duty. The action closed the night's immediate conflict without grand speeches. When the sun rose thin and pale, Marta sat at her own table and set a small hidden reserve of coals beneath a floorboard. She counted out the peat to Lars and Enya, wrote down the first names for the rota, and sealed a note to be read at the next council. The chapter ended not with a declaration but with a concrete set of acts. Bags redistributed, records promised, a rota begun, and a child warm beneath a shared blanket. Marta paused at the door as neighbours moved past, carrying small parcels. Her hands were smudged with ash, and the seam of her apron showed where she had smoothed it many times tonight. She took a breath that steadied the tremor in her chest and closed the door on the dawn. The last sound was a soft closing latch, a clear action that marked the moment. The village had suffered loss, trust had been strained, and choices had been made. For now, they had shared heat and a plan to keep a few nights safer. Marta yanked Ilya's cloak open and felt the damp weight of peat strike her palm. She did not wait to ask why. Suspicion tightened Marta's hands before she could name it, and the bundle slid free, peat granules falling onto the packed lane like a small, dark spill. "Elias," she said. Voice steady enough to be heard over the wind. "What do you have under your cloak?" He pressed his chin down and turned away, fingers working at something rough at his waist. Snow gusted across the lane in a hard ribbon. The immediate problem, the stolen peat, hung in the air like a raised weight. Marta's mind ran through the known facts. Tom found near the frozen well, his fingers white and the grain sack empty. The torn seal in the granary that she had seen with her own hands. A child coughing in a low cottage because hearths had barely embers. She took a breath, counted the facts aloud in small, plain sentences so her listeners could follow, and moved Ilias toward the doorway of her cottage where the lamplight would show details. She looked at Elias and then at the bundle. Her voice was steady. "Open your cloak, Elias." Now, he hesitated 2 heartbeats and then let his chest fall forward. The peat showed through a damp cloth, edges dark, a smell of wet earth and smoke. A child needed this, or a family would wake colder. Elias kept his eyes down Marta's eye. He started. He did not finish. His jaw worked. Pietro, passing with a milk pail, slowed and watched, then crossed the lane toward them. An immediate dispute had formed. Marta's hands, the bundle, Tom's collapsed body by the well. The crowd gathered because the hamlet had only so many hands and only so many warm hours. They went to the longhouse with Elias between them. The hearth had a thin red edge on the stones, no more. Villagers clustered in the low light. They breathed through wool, faces rimmed with smoke. Marta set the peat bundle on the table and struck a flint on the stone to show its worth. The sparks died fast in the damp clumps if not coaxed. "This is theft," Jory, short and quick. Standing by the granary ledger's corner, where a torn seal had been kept as evidence. His voice had the flatness of someone who handled counts and sacks. "The seal is broken. Grain is gone. Pete too." He jabbed a finger toward Elias. There was a small chorus of murmurs. Marta felt the council of the room tighten around her like a hand. "Marta," Tom from the hearth's shadow, and his voice came out thin but sharp. "We found footprints leading away from the granary toward the shepherd's stall. Not one set. Many. That means a plan, not a poor man stealing a handful." He stared at Elias and then at Jory. "We cannot have that. Not now." A flush crossed Elias's face. He pushed his hands into his sleeves and said, "I took only what I needed. My children." His voice broke on the word. He sounded small, and something in the longhouse shifted. Anger, then a quick, hard sympathy. Marta's suspicion shifted into something more complex. Marta stepped forward. "Who says you took only what you needed, Elias?" She asked. "Who says footprints mean 1 pair of feet?" Her question hung. She wanted an answer and the shape of the danger. A woman near the door, Anwen, looked down at her skirts and did not speak. The room leaned toward any word that would fix the dangerous name. Jory pushed a scrap of burlap across the table, where he had placed ragged pieces cut from the granary sacks. "These are new tiers," he said, "not the usual wear. Someone slit them. See these edges. Not a child at a corner. Tools. And the footprints, 3 sets, go toward the shepherd's pen. They done come back. They head on." He dropped his hand. "If the sacks are carried off to the pen, the sheep might be unsettled. Then grain moves out at night." He looked at Marta. "We must fetch what remains." The argument became fast. The room filled with short lines. "We cannot leave the stores. Tom, we cannot spare more hands." "Someone must go now," Jory answered. "Not tomorrow." "Who will cross the lane in this weather?" a woman asked. "Anwen, you keep to your cottage," someone began. Marta cut in. "I'll go, Marta." She did not wait for the usual negotiation. Her voice was small and flat, and the words landed in the center of the argument. Suspicion had been the root, but it opened into a decision. Her fingers smoothed her apron, a gesture she used when she pinned a plan to the world. The others tried to argue, 3 or 4 lines back and forth. "Marta," Tom started, "you should not. We need you." Elias, surprising everyone with his quickness. He had his own shame and fear tangled together. Marta had led before by counting tasks. She named steps now. Elias comes. Tom comes. Jory watches the longhouse. We move quietly. We take no more than we can carry. We do not split up. We return before dawn. Her voice made the plan concrete. People nodded in short lines. They pushed on cloaks and threaded gloves. They left the longhouse into a worsening flurry. The lane tried to erase their footprints as they walked. Marta noticed small details to measure danger. The custard-thick drifts wedged at doorways, stray sheep bells muffled by snow, the shepherd's stall door facing the hollow where wind funneled. She counted each of these without thinking. Practical measures first. Soon the granary keeper, Jory, halted them at the turn. "There are new tracks," he said, voice low. He pointed with a mittened hand. 2 sets skirted the copse. One ran wide, then cut toward the north pen. Marta knelt and crouched to look. The prints were shallow, showing hurried weight, and a small bundle dragged by a rope. She touched the compacted snow with a glove and felt grit. The discovery changed the argument. This was not hunger only, it was organized removal. They moved on in a tighter line. Wind cut across Marta's neck and made her shoulders bunch. Tom's breath rattled in his chest as they hurried. Marta heard the pause in his step and glanced back. His face was white at the mouth. He swallowed and kept moving. Fear edged at Marta's ribs. Fear for Tom's body that had failed him at the well. Fear that more would fail on this night. They reached the shepherd's stall and found the door ajar. The immediate event. An overturned trough and a scrap of burlap caught on a nail. Marta pressed her palm against the rough wood and pushed. Inside it smelled of sheep and wet fleece, and the burn of peat smoke from someone who had slept near the animals. A narrow path of footprints left the yard toward a shallow hollow. They had been careful, slipping along walls to avoid light. Someone used the south path. At Tom pointing, they moved more than peat. They moved sacks. At that moment, a new voice came from the dim corner of the pen. Anwen stepped forward, sleeves pushed up, a child's shawl draped across her arms. Her cheeks were red from cold and from the work of hiding. She looked at Marta and then at the group, and the room changed the way a hinge clicks into place. Anwen's voice was small. "I kept a few sacks back," she said. "I kept a small store. I could not let Sign wake in the night without heat. I have been tending her, and I could not tell because Mrs. Hyld would take what she had. I put these sacks under the bench in my cottage." Marta felt the argument shift again. Suspicion softened into comprehension, and then into a prickling of embarrassment across the room. "Why did you not tell us?" "Jory." His words were blunt, 2 lines said quickly. He had the ledger in his hands and the duty of the hamlet on his shoulders. Why not come before the council? Anwen's hands twisted at the shawl. "I was ashamed." Anwen answered, "Sign calves, and I thought if I told you, you would take it. I did not want her to freeze. I thought I could nurse and hide and share later. I took some grain and a bit of peat, yes. I thought I could keep it small." Her voice ended on a tight note. A silence fell that was not empty. Marta measured the room by the smallness and largeness of choices. This was a twist she had not expected. A neighbor hoarding to protect a sick child, not a band of organized thieves out to ruin them all. The new fact did not erase the torn seal and the missing grain, but it reshaped guilt and need. Then Jory laid out a fact that tugged the map again. "Sacks were slit near the top," he said. "But some sacks are gone from the shepherd's pen. Tracks continue toward the north road. Someone moved the rest out. We have 2 sets that turn there." He tapped the ledger in his hand. Anwen took a little. But someone else took much. Arguments broke out again in small bursts. "Then we must follow Tom. We cannot leave the stores to wander into other hands. If we chase and find nothing, we risk losing more to the cold," Elias replied. Marta listened to the exchange, counting the lines, feeling the shift from suspicion into urgent planning. Marta stepped between them. "We split. A small party to follow the tracks now and others to guard the longhouse and tend Sign and Anwen. I will lead the party. Tom will come with me. Elias will come because he knows the north lane," she each name and each task, making commitments that could be tested. They went with rope and lanterns. The wind clawed at their faces. The blizzard thickened and stars vanished. Footprints narrowed into single lines where the snow had partially covered previous marks. At one point Tom slid and his knees hit packed ice. Marta heard him curse under his breath and then steady himself. The group's mood tightened when Tom's steps staggered. Marta moved closer and touched his shoulder with a brief bag of breath. "Tom, hold steady," she said. He nodded with a short breath and pushed on. Fear changed its hue into practical care. Marta wrapped the rope tighter around the bundle they carried and checked the knots. The group's roles became clearer. Jory kept watch at the crossroads. Anwen remained with Sign. The party of three, Marta, Tom, Elias, moved into the white wall of the blizzard. Halfway across an open field, Tom faltered. His boots skidded, and he went down on one knee. His fingers were numb and his face screwed in a way that showed strain. Marta dropped to her knees beside him and pressed her palms to his hands, rubbing the frost away with firm, practical motions. She took a pinch of warmed cloth from her shawl and tucked it inside his mitten, breathed Tom. "Count with me," she said. Tom breathed and counted slowly. He did not speak long, only a single short line each time. Elias leaned over to help, and the three of them made a small human stack against the wind. Fear had heightened, the second clear emotion shift, and Marta could feel her thoughts narrow to the single point of getting Tom to the crouched cottage. When they saw the cottage's low shape at the horizon, a thin halo of lamplight trembled inside. It was a small dot in the white, but it meant warmth. Marta pushed herself to the last pace and felt her legs burn. Elias's steps lagged. His face showed strain and the shame of earlier. He nothing until they reached the yard. At the cottage threshold they found a child curled on a low pallet, cheeks flushed with fever, breath quick and shallow. Anwen hovered, hands busy with a steaming bowl. Marta set down the last usable bundle and struck a spark with a stick and flint she carried. The damp peat breathed out a faint, stubborn smoke. She coaxed embers with patient, exact blows, and a small, breathing fire took. The scene changed from pursuit and accusation to immediate care. Marta pressed warmed coals to the child's small, stiff fingers and wrapped her own shawl around the little shoulders. Sign, "Stay warm, Anwen." Not a plea, but a simple instruction that carried the shape of a mother. Marta felt a relief that the bundle would save a life, and a new tension. There remained missing grain, and those who had taken sacks further along. At dawn they returned. The hamlet had the slow, quiet stir of people who had slept badly and then stood up to do labor anyway. Footprints came back to the lane. Some led to the longhouse and some to other cottages. Villagers sorted what they had: a sack left by a stoop, a few logs, a salted herring wrapped in oilcloth. The discovery was small and hard. They did not recover all the stolen grain. Jory counted. He read numbers aloud with a steady voice. Marta listened. Some sacks were returned, some were found near hedgerows, half emptied, and their contents damp. Anwen handed over the small store she had hoarded, cheeks set. "I will give it back," she said. "Take it. Use it for Sign and the rest." Her confession had shifted how the village would assign blame and mercy. They reorganized rations at the longhouse. Decisions were made by counting. Who would sow chores, who would feed the animals, and who would stand guard at the granary. Marta suggested rotating watches so no single pair of hands would be overburdened. The group agreed with short lines and brisk nods. Elias volunteered to help mend torn sacks and to work the pen, offering a concrete atonement. The twist that had widened the danger, the footprints toward the north road, became a settled fact with consequences. Jory arranged a schedule to post a watch at the north gate. Tom volunteered to lead the watch in the first watch, short and clipped in tone. Elias would take the second. Marta would oversee the rota and teach the watchers how to detect footprints through new snow. Marta checked the torn seal one last time and wrapped a new cord across the granary lid. She placed a piece of folded parchment beneath the cord with a short note. The ledger entry of what remained and who had been present the night before. She did this not as punishment but as a record, clearly written facts to prevent rumor from growing into harm. By mid-morning the hamlet rhythmed with modest, efficient labor. Villagers moved with tasks rather than long predictions. Marta handed grain rations in measured scoops, watched faces as they accepted them, and felt the careful trade of trust being built again. Her suspicion that had opened the chapter had become a tool. Watchfulness that guided choices rather than an accusation that ruined relationships. Elias came to her with a small bundle of cords he had mended. "Marta," he said, voice steady, I will mend what is torn. I will stand watch. I am sorry. His apology was not theatrical. It was a short lineup of words followed by work. Marta nodded and placed a hand on his shoulder in a practical, unshowy way. Tom sat by the longhouse doorway, chewing on a crust of bread. He had blanched in the field and then recovered. You did right to come, Marta, he said. It without praise, the kind of voice that meant recognition of duty. Marta only smoothed her apron and watched the longhouse stones as villagers filed past, each carrying out a small, necessary task. At noon Marta walked the lane and counted the footprints that had returned. Some were bright and new. Others were faint and smudged. She could name at least 3 people who had vanished into the night and not been seen at dawn, those who took the sacks further north. Whether they had left to survive or to profit, the village could not yet say. The immediate conflicts had settled into concrete plans. Guards, ration schedules, a ledger that would not let rumor multiply. Unwin held sign close and helped feed the small circle of children who huddled at the longhouse hearth. She spoke quietly about new ways to measure medicine and keep a child's fever small. Her actions shifted how others saw her. From secret hoarder to someone who had made a hard choice and now worked to remedy it. When the day's chores slowed, Marta went to the granary and closed the lid with a firm push. She tied the cord and tucked the parchment beneath. She looked up at the longhouse threshold and then toward the lane where Elias had been caught. Her hands were steady, her jaw set. The immediate crises were resolved. Sign had warmth, Unwin had returned the hoarded sacks, Jory had a rota, Tom had recovered enough to stand watch. The larger mystery, who took the rest toward the north road, remained a fact to be pursued later, but it no longer ruled decisions. Before dusk, Marta made a small change to the longhouse routine. She juried to keep the granary ledger next to the hearth, so that anyone who came for grain must be accounted for in daylight. She arranged that every transaction would be done openly, with names spoken aloud. The plan was small and specific and built to prevent a repeat that preyed on secrecy. As the sun lowered, Marta stepped out and closed the longhouse door behind her with a single, decisive push. The cord on the granary creaked once. She paused and listened to a child inside laugh softly, and to Tom's low voice giving instruction to a young watcher. She felt the tired relief gather in her limbs like a slow easing, and then she turned the key of the granary latch with a firm twist. Marta set the latch and snapped the cord forward. "Keep watch," she said to Jory in a short line that carried both an order and a thanks. He nodded and lifted his ledger. Outside, a light wind moved the last thin patches of snow across the lane. She closed the longhouse threshold with a final push that made the door settle, and then she stood with her hand resting on the wood. It was a concrete end to the night's conflict. A locked store, a counted ledger, a rota written in ink, and a child warmed by a last stubborn spark. Marta felt the decision was right and complete, and then she turned and walked back to the hearth.